Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Primary Science Podcast. Now, a few weeks ago, the ASE Southeast Asia Conference 2026 took place at the beautiful King's College Bangkok campus, and it brought together primary and secondary science educators from all over the region. We are extremely lucky once again, everyone, to be joined by three brilliant guests to help us reflect on some of the highlights. We've got Will Byfield, Head of Science over at King's College Bangkok, who worked incredibly hard to curate, honestly, such an amazing day. We've got Dr. Hellen Ward and Professor Louise Archer. So let's get straight into it, everybody. First, let's go over to Will. Will, absolute pleasure to have you with us today, and welcome to the show. I wonder if you could just give us a little introduction into the main idea behind the conference this year.
Yeah, so as I say, we're lucky enough to host it for the second time, but actually the conference, the Southeast Asia ASE Conference, is in its fourth year. And with last year being a bit of a changeover from the previous school, we scaled some aspects back, including removing, in the second time, we had a primary strand. And so that was the first thing we considered. And what we tried to do this year is actually bring the primary aspect back, but remove the concept of strand, and instead ensure we had workshops that were primary, workshops that were senior, and also open to all, to hopefully blur the lines between these stages and phases and kind of encourage everyone to engage as science educators rather than necessarily as just primary science educators or secondary science educators. The other big thing that we wanted to do was expand the technician strand. So we doubled capacity for that, so going from 20 to 40 places, and also provided some discounted tickets. Partly the main reason for that is that technician CPD is really hard to find in the region, and different schools are in different financial positions. So we wanted to ensure that as many technicians as possible could access the places. And looking beyond just the British curriculum schools to looking beyond the international schools and actually provide this training just to all in the region. And we were also really lucky to have four amazing guest speakers this year. Two of them are joining us today. And without those people giving up their time for free, we wouldn't be able to provide the tickets at that price. But ultimately, the conference also allows people to hear from people like Louise and Helen, who are at the forefront of educational research, and also having the opportunity to hear from each other and other teachers in the region. And one thing that, from my perspective as a head of department, also have a platform to lead and share their expertise. And it was an amazing thing for me to see this year, both my teachers and technicians leading CPD. And ultimately, the conference is about bringing people together and trying to spark those conversations into something that become everyday conversations, not just at the conference, but beyond.
And I must say as well, I certainly noticed a difference from the first year. It really did feel that goal of blurring those lines together, bringing everyone together towards that one goal was achieved to some extent. And I'd love to go over and meet our next wonderful guest, Hellen. Hellen, a pleasure to welcome you back for your second visit to the Primary Science Podcast. Now, I attended the first of three workshops alongside several other secondary science teachers, and that was a real highlight for me. I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, what stood out most about the way that primary and secondary were brought together?
Well, thank you for attending the session, and I have to say it was quite interesting because I believe you were the only primary participant in that session, which was aimed at primary Ofsted. It was very interesting. One of the key things that I feel is important is that we give teachers something that they can use, because I think you want something that is relevant to you. Having worked with both primary, secondary, special educational needs schools and teachers, it was quite nice to see. It was a bit of a surprise, I will admit, to find that you were the only primary person there. But it was actually really interesting to see how teachers were able to think about curriculum coherence, which is one of my big areas of interest. So many of the teachers who were attending, and I think your school is the same, have children from the age of 2 to 18. So it's a really unusual experience. And I talked to some of the teachers afterwards, and some of them said that they were interested because they were Key Stage 3. So they wanted to know what was going on. Others were just interested because I think Ofsted was where they were looking at. But I think there is a real importance because the session that you attended was really talking about how we meet the needs of the children, but also how some contexts, when you're teaching a national curriculum, which is something that many of these schools do, where they have contexts which are not necessarily very useful. So that was quite an interesting thing that came out in the sessions. And also, Ofsted themselves identified that there's a real difference between primary and secondary. Secondary are really good at knowing what we're implementing and also how we judge the impact. In primary, we're quite good about talking about what we think is really important. And yet Ofsted found that we told them what our intentions were, but they often found that that wasn't actually something that they saw. So it was really interesting to see teachers having the opportunity to talk about that spread of learning from the age of 2 to 18, and also whether or not they talked to each other and whether they had a real good understanding, which you would imagine that they would have because they were in such a unique situation of children from 2 to 18 with very little churn. So I'm hoping that one of the things that might come out of it is an understanding of there's an opportunity to talk to each other more, to have a greater understanding about what we do, because we do things in different ways, but we all have the same aim and idea at the end.
Thank you very much for that, Helen. And I do have a little bit of a follow-up there. I was just wondering, with continued purposeful shared CPD like at the ASE a few weeks ago, do you think we could build on curriculum coherence from the inside as teachers? Or is it something that needs to be done from top down? Or is it more complex and a bit of both?
I think that you're in a unique situation. There are schools in the UK who were also academy trusts that run across primary and secondary. So they all have the same interest. And I don't think, because your schools are different, that was one of the other things that came out quite strongly. You have different ethoses, and therefore having an understanding of, from the teachers who were working there, what it is that they wanted their science curriculum to be, which ties into Louise's expertise. Because obviously, if we get an understanding right from the very beginning, and teachers work together to say, actually, that's probably not necessary here. Let's spend more time building the foundations and the vocabulary. And then we know that we will pick that up later and we will know what they've actually had. So there won't be this Key Stage 3 where it's the biggest area of link, but is obviously perhaps the weakest area across the curriculum just because of the lack of clear viewpoints in some cases. So I think there's lots of opportunity to make a real difference because you're in a unique situation. And also, once you've done the work, other people in other parts of the world could learn from it.
Thank you. An encouraging statement there. So I'd love to go over to Louise now. I have to say your keynote was incredibly powerful and really just tied the whole idea together with that focus on all the in-depth research into science identity, science capital, science field. And I just wanted to ask, why is it so important that we focus on supporting that engagement across both primary and secondary?
So our research is mainly conducted in England, and we were really struck by how, if you look at the international assessments, the comparisons, that actually we seem to be doing quite well. For example, in TIMSS and PISA, if you look at England's data, we're up there often in the top 5. So it looks like we're really good at teaching kids to at least learn enough science to pass the test. But for the same young people, when you look at their cohort data in terms of engagement, it just doesn't match. So when we look at things like, we've got a survey in the UK called the Science Education Tracker, And that found for the same cohort who did really well in the TIMS that their engagement, particularly amongst that sort of 11 to 14 key stage 3 age, was really declining over time. So fewer kids are seeing science as being for them. They're not feeling as confident at it. There's a growing gender gap with girls not engaging as much as boys. So our research is really trying to get to the heart of what creates that difference. Why are kids able to do science, do quite well at it often, but not see it as being for me in the future? So our Aspires study has tracked young people. It's a longitudinal study. It uses mixed methods, and it's tracked young people from the age of 10 up to 22. We've surveyed over 47,000 young people. We've conducted over 740 interviews with children, young people and their parents and carers. And it's kind of given us a nice depth and breadth of understanding of what it is that makes some young people engage with science and some don't. And we were really struck in that by, even though young people are finding science interesting, it's like, well done teachers, they're doing a great job of making the science interesting, they still don't see it as being for me. And that's where we've tried to look at what the reasons are and then work with teachers to design solutions for how we can improve that.
Thank you there, Louise. And that is actually a very clear result. I wonder if we could go over to Will, following on from what Louise said there, with more students starting to feel that science is just not for them, even though they're enjoying it and finding it interesting. Is this something that you think we're seeing in our international context as well? And I wonder if you have any ideas about how we can take this on board and begin to perhaps counteract this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, I can only really speak from kind of my particular school and this particular context. But with my demographic, actually, science and STEAM is really central to what the students want to study in their futures. And that could be, lots of different reasons. It could be cultural, it could be socioeconomic. I won't be able to answer that now, but maths and the 3 sciences are our 4 most subscribed A-level courses. And students then go on to study forms of science at university. But there is a gap that I see. It's quite interesting. And that gap is to do, from my perspective, with the science capital for the region. And it kind of is split up into 2. It's interesting. It ties in with what Helen was saying about Key Stage 3. And if I kind of leave Key Stage 3 for just a second, and it's really where I see that the gap is in the IGCSE or GCSE and A level. It being international, we do the IGCSE and IA level, with the purpose it being not a UK context. And I know that even the GCSE and the A level courses have shifted away from maybe highlighting particular scientists or discoveries, but the aim of international is to not have such a UK focus. However, and this is the problem I feel with when we're in international and when we're in A level and GCSE, is that we don't have that much freedom to build our own science capital around it, because ultimately we have to teach the syllabus. And that's what they're going to be examined on. And it's very difficult to make those calls to be, right, I'm going to spend all this time building this science capital around it, because, well, actually, if that's what they're examined on, that's what they need to know. A good example of this is cystic fibrosis. So the incidence of cystic fibrosis in the EU is approximately 1 in 2,000 people. In Southeast Asia, it's 1 in 100,000 to 350,000. It's much less common, but cystic fibrosis is still used as the prominent genetic example, and at least with the courses that I do, it's also a major case study. Now, obviously, international serves everything other than UK, so I have to appreciate that it isn't a Southeast Asia course, but it's interesting where we kind of get held up in terms of building the space to build that science capital. Now, going back to Key Stage 3, there we've actually been able to have loads of fun, because it can be a little bit more flexible. We're not necessarily bound by an examination. And so we've kind of built our own bespoke junior science curriculum based on the national curriculum, but had that freedom to, and as Helen said, one thing, with us being a 2 to 18, we've looked down, and, well, I shouldn't say down, looked across, so to primary and early years, and thought about that journey coming up and then continuing on. And we've had that freedom because there isn't this exam at the end of it that we have to kind of all work towards. And I think something that's exciting me in particular about upcoming curriculum reviews is that opportunity. Because as you say, is it for us as teachers to build that capital? Is it from curriculums and syllabuses? And I think it kind of has to be from the syllabuses for the context of A-level and GCSE, because the focus ultimately, rightly or wrongly, will become on the exam. And there was a recent teacher TAP survey that said 4 in 5 science teachers supported reducing the volume of content at Key Stage 4. And it cited outdated or unnecessary topics. But I think it's difficult, and no one will ever agree on what's outdated and what's unnecessary. There won't be a complete agreement. There'll be camps that fight for quadrats. There'll be camps that fight against quadrats. I'm using a biology example there, as that's my specialism. And also, it's difficult because we are a subject that ultimately builds on prior knowledge. So knowledge is never really outdated if we're thinking about that build. Now, some fantastic changes were made at the last review in terms of making the exams, from my perspective, more challenging and actually testing thinking as opposed to recall of knowledge. But I think with this new curriculum review coming up over the next few years, I think that is an opportunity to give teachers the space within the GCSE and the A-level to build their own science capital dependent on their particular context. But I do feel at the moment that is incredibly challenging because it's such a packed syllabus for most of the sciences, and you've got to get through it to the exams, because that is what they will be examined on, which is a shame. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we will be given that little bit of freedom.
Thank you very much there, Will. Yeah, it's quite a challenge, but it looks like we're moving towards it in some ways, and this awareness and culture towards building science capital into the syllabus, it's really an exciting time. And I'd actually love to dig a little bit deeper into this if I could. And I would love to go over to Louise and ask, from your research, if we want more students to actually feel that science is for them, what exactly is it that needs to change in the classroom across those phases?
We've had the privilege of working over many years with absolutely fantastic primary and secondary teachers to take those research insights and translate them into what could this mean in the classroom? How can we use these ideas to better support the science identities and capital of children in the class? And we've come up with a teaching approach called the Science Capital Teaching Approach and the Primary Science Capital Teaching Approach. And the teachers told us they wanted it to be really practical. So it works with any syllabus, any curriculum. And it's really a way of just trying to link the science content to the lives, the identities of the children in your class, like what they care about, what they know about already. And it just sort of starts, rather than with the science content, start with the child and ground it in their lives. So we've seen it used in various places across the world. The teachers tell us it's helped them to get back to teaching in a way that feels meaningful for them, because it's engaging the kids. And they talk about having these kind of meerkat moments where the children suddenly sit up and go, oh, okay, I've experienced that. I know that. That makes sense to me. So we hope that it's something that's being helpful to find that relevance, and which brings the engagement and also supports attainment as well. And we're really pleased that the teachers and young people who've tried it have told us it makes them happier. And I think happier teachers is always a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's actually promising indeed. And I think if this approach, this science capital teaching approach, exists and works so well, I wonder if we could identify what is the biggest challenge in getting schools, the world over, as it works with any syllabus, to adopt this approach. Is there any way that we can create that greater consistency in its use at all?
Yeah, I think, in time is always the challenge, and it's a reflective approach. It does encourage teachers to be reflective practitioners, and that requires a bit of time and space and support. And we know that's always like the number one challenge for any teachers and schools. But in the UK, we've worked with the Primary Science Teaching Trust and the Ogden Trust, and we trained a network of accredited trainers who can now deliver the approach through professional development in their regions. So I think one challenge is It does require a bit of a change in mindset. So it's not something you tick off in half an hour, boom, we're done, and we can move on and deliver it. So I would say the time and the investment in it is the main challenge. But we've had a range of teachers taking part, and some volunteered enthusiastically, some were volunteered by their schools. And the thing that made a difference was that most teachers found even after the first, we usually have several sessions, even after the first session, they could go and try something in the classroom. And when they saw that spark, that change in the kids, then they bought in. And I think that's always the test of any approach.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. I would love to be involved in making that a more international thing. Is it something that's being done internationally as well with these networks of accredited trainers?
We haven't got any formalised networks, but a few countries have started to take it up, translate the resources and start that process. So, yeah, I think it's something that's growing. And I think now that science identity is in the PISA assessments, we're anticipating that it's going to keep growing. More people will want to find ways to really support the science identity of children. So thankfully, like Blue Peter, here's one we made earlier.
Love it. Thank you. And so over to Hellen now with this science capital teaching approach. I'd just love to ask what you think great science teaching might look like specifically in a primary classroom.
I think it will look different in different contexts because children will have different starting points. And good science teaching enables children to have their ideas uncovered, to allow them to ask and answer questions, and for them to feel that they are part of the science process, not something that's done to them. So in some ways, like Will was saying, a good way of working out whether your curriculum works in secondary is how many kids want to do A-level. It's no good looking at how good your O-levels are or your GCSEs because everybody has to do those. It's good to have good results, but if you have amazing results but nobody chooses A-level, then that suggests that maybe it's a curriculum that doesn't appeal. The same in primary. We now no longer test children in primary, which is amazingly good because the narrowing of the curriculum, which happens with tests all over the world, is not a good thing for children to be involved organically in their education. And one of the lovely things I've found about primary science, I've been doing reviewing in the last week, is a number of head teachers who've said that as a result of children taking more ownership of the questions that they ask and following some of their own ideas, the children are seeing themselves as scientists, not just doing science. And that when they are enthusiastic and they find new things for themselves. As teachers, sometimes we feel that the best science lessons and the things that are most important to the children are the things that are fun, like things like Coke and Mento, because it goes up and the children are so excited. However, research demonstrated when the researchers spoke to the teachers about what the best science was in their year, and then came back and said to the children what was the best, the teachers often chose the things that were fun, exploding toothpaste, etc., and so forth. The children often chose activities where they worked in groups, followed their own ideas, and found solutions. So I would say the very best teaching will look different in different places, but it will always enable the children to have a clear understanding of the questions that they're asking, understand who in the world is doing something similar, and how what they see links to the things that they're interested in. I feel that we need our children to have the widest curriculum opportunities while ensuring that the knowledge that they have really meets their needs at that point in time.
So I'd love to finish this main discussion with one practical takeaway each, if that's okay. Apart from what's already been said, what is one thing that you hope teachers might carry forward based on the ASE conference and today's discussion?
From my perspective, I think the thing that I was try and remember and share with people in my department is the C in CPD, the continuing part. And yes, it can come in days like the ASE conference. It can come in 3-day training courses, but it's making sure that we do that every day, that we reflect on the lessons that we've done. We discuss with colleagues, we invite people to observe, we run action research projects and make sure we do student voice. And I think because teaching is really busy and demanding, and because CPD doesn't always have deadlines like it does for, say, getting your marking done for the next lesson, or this has to be handed in, etc., it's easy for that to fall down to the bottom of the pile. So the kind of takeaway I would say is, if you're at the start of your professional career, make sure you timetable that in, book that in, and protect that time to reflect and to think. If you're a middle or senior leader, make sure you are giving staff the opportunity, the flexibility and the support for them to do that, and to make sure that they're engaging in CPD every day, not necessarily just looking for those 3 courses or whatever it might be over the year, but make sure that it happens week in, week out, day in, day out.
Thank you. And over to you, Hellen.
I have to say that I found the enthusiasm for science from all the teachers who attended sessions, and from seeing the very nature in which the day spread out and the range of different opportunities that the teachers had. That struck me as being the best type of CPD, because people were talking to each other and engaging. And in one of the sessions, we had a lively debate about whether primary children really did need to know about quantum physics. And then there were secondary teachers who wanted to know why primary teachers were even thinking about quantum physics. But I think underneath it developed an interesting idea, which goes back in some ways to what Will said. It's not about just being on CPD. It's having those wider conversations about what is important, what isn't, which is difficult in an everyday setting. But, what can children actually generally take in? And by children, I mean any child who happens still to be in school, whether we call them students or we call them pupils or we call them children. They can only pick up so much information. And yet we have curriculums that overload that curriculum understanding. Then how do we ensure that building blocks can happen? And teachers, I think, need to have those conversations themselves. I mean, it's all right me saying, do less, they'll learn more. But I'm not the person that's responsible for those children's curriculum knowledge at the end of the day. I might know that actually really is the most important thing that they need to be able to access, rather than lots of information coming to them and it all disappearing. So the lively debates that happened was the takeaway for me, that there's a lot of good science going on, that people are ready to question things, to ask about things, and to learn about what we do in science from the age of 2 to 18. Because if we don't get curriculum coherence sorted, then realistically we are in little tiny silos, and we might be silos going this way or silos going that way, depending on how you view it. But it's not good for the children, and it's not good long term for people taking up developing science and making a positive impact on the world in which they work. So thank you. I really enjoyed my time with you, and I hope the debates about what should be, what shouldn't be, is undertaken by teachers.
Thank you. And over to Louise.
Thanks. I really hope that the teachers came away excited and feeling a bit more equipped to engage with equity issues. So to use a horribly English example, I hope they now think of equity issues as like a stick of rock, going through all of their teaching, and not just something that we park over there or the person down the corridor deals with. And if nothing else, I hope they really benefit from having that space to stop, to reflect, and to share with colleagues, because we know that it's so precious, it's so pressed normally in everyday teaching, but also stopping and reflecting is so powerful.
Yeah, that is absolutely 100% true. And I feel like really we're just getting started with this discussion. However, we did promise this would just be a short feature. So very regrettably, we will need to bring this to a close, and just continue to reflect on these really important ideas discussed here today within our everyday practice. And I really can't say it enough. A huge, huge thank you to you, Will, Hellen, and Louise, for all your hard work towards what was an incredible ASE conference, and for gifting us all today with your valuable time, coming here, sharing these really important reflections with us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone else out there for listening. And as always, we will see you next time on the Primary Science Podcast. Bye, everybody.